the Age of Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. From 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Vision radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear.
Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners. This is Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission radio show. Thank you for joining us. Today is March 27th, 2018, 8 o'clock here in Eugene, Oregon. It's a bit gray outside. I hope your weather is faring a little bit better than ours. I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank KEPW. I have a little bit of feedback on my side. My guests tell me they can't hear it, so I'm going to assume the radio show can't either. So if I hesitate while I'm talking, that's the reason. But we have back with us, a person who worked in the nuclear industry. We call him Mr. Truth. He worked on a nuclear facility in the heart of the country, and he really had a lot of trouble with the way that they did business. Now he's outside of the industry, and he's getting medical issues coming up from his exposure to those chemicals and to some of the radioactivity. We don't know if it's a radioactivity, but for sure we can identify some of the chemicals. We call him Mr. Truth. And I have also with us my co-host, Jerome Herbert, who's on Wednesdays and Thursdays on this radio show, because Mr. Truth was talking scientific-y stuff last time, and I felt a little bit like it was above my head, so I thought I'd ask Jerome to join us. So thank you, Mr. Truth, for joining us, and thanks, Jerome, for helping me out.
You're quite welcome, Lonnie.
Great. So the last time we talked, we were talking about the nuclear facilities and, like some of the things that were going on. And one of the things I think you wanted to highlight was the way these nuclear power facilities are built and the kind of things they're doing. So is that something that you want to talk about right away? Is the way these are built? Because the last time we talked, you said this really stuck in my head where you said that there was, on the diagrams, they look like it's really clean and neat, but the reality is these things have just they're just on pipes on top of pipes there, and it's not the neatest and cleanest thing in the world.
It's more like a jungle.
Wow.
When you actually walk into there, it is miles and miles and miles of instrumentation cables and instrumentation tubing that are required to operate the instrumentation and send the signals back to the control room. So some of that instrumentation is very adequate, and some of it I really question. Because that was part of my job, or that was my job, was instrumentation and controls.
So what specifically, can you mention a couple of things that caused you concern about the instrumentation and control systems?
Or components of?
Yes. Well, as I said before on the last show, I saw the way that the whole system was set up as far as satisfying the NRC requirements. Duke Power or Duke Energy had its own quality control, and then above those were quality assurance. So what actually happened in the field had to be filtered through two departments before the information was actually handed to the NRC, if it ever was. Because some things were
so in that process,
issues.
And so the NRC would just take their word for whatever they said then, right?
Well, they would supposedly review what they had said, but I personally was in a meeting with an NRC representative and a quality assurance, the chief of quality assurance on the site there. We were discussing control valves that control these systems, the safety-related
like
systems.
water valves, you mean?
Well, a control valve is usually operated by air or electrics, and usually by air. There was an issue about on certain systems copper tubing, and that was inside the reactor vessel itself and on safety-related systems.
That's horrible.
Copper tubing is very soft. It's susceptible to damage.
Right.
I was asked about the Nuclear Regulatory Commission representative asked me about the copper tubing because I've been working on that problem as a technician. And when I answered him honestly, when he asked the specific question, what would happen if that copper tubing were damaged? And I told him it would either stop or slow the response on the control valves. So they could either lose control or have severely slowed control. Like for a valve to open or close allowed, or that either turned on or off the water to one of the loops. And when I answered the question truthfully by telling him that it would either stop or slow the control valve from operating, the QA representative held his finger up to his lips, making a motion for me to, first he said, but response time's not a factor on those. And I said, well, they're on safety-related systems. It most certainly is. When I looked, he held his finger up to his lips in a motion to tell me to be quiet. And when
Wow.
when I looked at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission representative, he was conveniently looking at the wall instead of looking at the quality assurance guy or me.
Wow.
I mean,
So, those safety valves, that's always what's going down. If you read the nuclear alerts, Mr. Truth, that's what's on the nuclear alerts often is those types of valves are always those shutters. They know they have faulty parts they're putting in there, in other words.
Yeah, and the reason that they didn't want to make certain changes was because Duke Energy had two plants at the time. One was started before the other, but they were sister plants. One is 17 miles north of Charlotte. The other one is about 17 or 18 miles south of Charlotte. The first one that come online was the McGuire plant. Since they were sister plants, in other words, built basically the same, if they issued a design change at the second plant, then they had to figure in the work onto the first plant on the very next shutdown. And so at that time, it became an economical issue, and they didn't want to have to deal with it or shut the plant down or...
That's ridiculous.
...work up to have 75 to 100 people go in there and make these changes in radioactive environment. So,
what do you think it would have cost them, Walter? I mean, Mr. Truth.
Well, it would have cost them quite a bit of money because the redesign, the meeting the hangar standards, meeting all the construction specifications for it, if it had been done before the plants were actually in operation, when the problem was actually identified, or I tried to identify it to them, it would have been less than 1/3, or probably less than 1/10 of the cost that it would have taken them after the plant was in operation.
Wow.
Because after the plant was in operation, then anybody that went into the hot areas, when I say hot areas, I mean the radioactive areas, the containment building itself, it would take about an hour to suit up, an hour to get your tools together, and an hour to get checked in through the only access to the containment building there was, which was called a personnel airlock. You went inside of it. It was sort of like transferring from a clean air environment. All the air was sucked out, replaced with the air from the containment building, and then then and only then would the door open that you could go into the containment building. Okay. So it would take, you had to log every piece of equipment that you took in, and you had to log every piece of equipment that you took out, right down to a nut, bolt, screw, wrench, screwdriver, level, anything you took in or out after a certain point had to be exactly logged. So you were talking about a 2 to 3 hour process just to get in to the containment building.
This is why it's so expensive.
Mr. Truth.
Yes.
Yes. So I have a couple of semi-technical questions for you, if you and Lonnie don't mind.
No, I don't.
So we're talking your basic boiling water reactor, correct?
Yeah, boiling water pressurizer with ice condensers inside the containment building. It's what they call a 4-loop, but that's...
And what did they use for a suppression pool? Did they have an Oculus, a donut-type suppression pool around the containment, or did they have other types of suppression?
Around the containment building or around the...
Well, attached to the reactor vessel itself, they have a suppression of some sort that will absorb any dramatic increases or decreases. Like the General Electric has a big donut-shaped thing at the bottom of the reactor vessel. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, at the bottom of the reactor vessel on the 2 plants that I worked on, there was what they call the in-core instrumentation room. The reactor vessel itself, there was a small, well, it was about 8 inches thick steel. and
okay.
I was down in the in-core instrumentation room. There were rods that ran into there that they could send probes up into the reactor to tell the actual fission process that was going on and other minerals, temperatures, things of that nature.
Mr. Truth,
so those control rods, those control valves that you were talking about earlier now, those are hydraulic valves oftentimes, actually hydraulically or pneumatically. So that was the issue they had in Fukushima. It wasn't that they were trying to flip an electric valve. It was they were trying to turn on an air pump to actuate a pneumatic valve. And the piping was all broke, and it was, and that's exactly what you're talking about, is that these pneumatic valves, the ones that control the core spray system, the emergency cooling system, those valves are attached to airlines that are made of copper. Is that what you're saying? And the copper literally runs through the reactor vessel.
Well, it doesn't run through the reactor vessel. It's inside the containment building.
Okay.
But the copper line was attached to a stainless steel air line, and if you understand pneumatics, the stainless steel airline was classified Class G, which is the lowest class of air that you could have. That was the lowest grade system there was of piping. It required less inspection and everything like that. So then, therefore, they didn't want to. If they would have upgraded the copper tubing, the stainless steel tubing inside the reactor, then they would have to have found another source for the air, which would have cost them a lot more money to rerun and create a different source of air other than general instrumentation air.
Right. So, yeah, I see the problem with that.
At the point,
that's another Fukushima waiting to happen right there.
Yes, sir.
Wow. Do you think that this is common, Mr. Truth, at all the nuclear facilities when they build them? Do you think this is this is why that NRC person looked away at the wall because he knew that you were saying the wrong thing?
Yeah, he knew it. He knew it.
Wow.
It was very obvious he knew it, because otherwise, I mean, just the series of events there.
I feel like I want you to give me his name. I want to go protest and rattle him up a bit and, follow him until he, turns his mind around. Seriously. Is that how the old... Donna Gilmore from SantaNofreSafety.org tells me that she's had a lot of contact with him, and she believes that a lot of them just don't know. They don't understand the systems. They believe the paperwork.
Well, they believe paperwork. They believe in what they've seen in design, and they believe the design engineer, and the design engineer works for the company. And that's why the whole structuring of what the NRC does when they handle a problem, if you're talking to a quality assurance person that works directly for the company, of course he's going to take the company's side, and he's going to make the information that's handed to the NRC look the best that he can for them. And the NRC, basically, they only just monitor. They don't actually go out and look. They just monitor the paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say foxes in the hen house?
Yeah.
We got the foxes watching over the hen house. That's not very smart, is it? I mean, that's what that boils down to.
Yeah, and what it is, I mean, the truth is something that should be very easy to tell.
Exactly.
You have to buy. But I mean, a lot of people will lie to you, but there's a reason. There's a motivational reason that people will lie, and there's a motivational reason that people will neglect things. And I personally, if I had known how the NRC worked before I went on those nuclear stations in construction, I would not have. I would have felt really guilty, and a lot of times after I was moved into the office as an engineering technician, I did feel really guilty because I knew that I was being part of the problem.
You were staying silent to the things that you saw.
Yeah, and silence was, at that time, it meant a lot to me. I mean, just imagine this, Mike. If they could do that in North Carolina, and the economy, and they can buy people's silence, imagine what they can do in a third world country or somewhere like that. By building a nuclear reactor, they could buy more silence and more silence just with a loaf of bread. That's
true. That's true, Mr. Truth. Is that really the truth? A good name, Mr. Truth. Because the truth should not be difficult. The truth is not difficult to tell. The thing is, this is what I don't get. If it's expensive, like if these the kinds of things that you found out, they're just part of the practice of business, of doing the business, right? So if these kinds of costs are expensive, and it's too expensive really to build a nuclear facility, if it was really prohibitive, to make it really work and be efficient, why are they doing it?
Well, because in the 70s, when we first ran into an energy crunch, and the Environmental Protection Agency, which I do believe in, they were finding out the carbon emissions for coal-fired plants. They were all down on that. And which, yes, we need clean air to breathe. But, so they decided, what the power industry decided was, if we go to nuclear reactors, we don't have to deal with the carbon emissions problem of coal-fired plants.
As well, aren't nuclear reactors heavily subsidized too?
Excuse me?
Yes, of course they are. Yeah, yes.
Yeah, aren't nuclear plants subsidized, where coal and oil or gas plants weren't?
Yeah, nuclear stations, the government loaned the power companies money at 1% interest. And that was giving them a certain time that they had to bring that plant online.
But let's charge the students 12% interest.
Yeah, 1% interest at the time. Interest on a house was about on a mortgage was about 11%, 10 or 11%. It was back in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s. So interest rates were really high.
So they were charging homeowners more interest than they were the nuclear power. Duke Energy, who could actually really afford to pay for these things. That's the thing. This is the offense. It's Duke Energy, because it's not like there's some startup new company that doesn't have a deep pocket. They could have paid for this. That procedure to fix these could have been fixed.
It could have been fixed had the proper planning, and if they would actually listen to the personnel, the craft personnel that were out there working. I mean, there were a lot of quality assurance and quality control people that had never had their hands on a wrench. They didn't know They didn't understand the physics behind these systems. They just did not understand it, but they were over quality control and quality assurance.
Wow. That's dumbfounding. You'd think everybody that was in contact with the entire chain of events understood the basic physics of how it works.
Out of the entire crew of reactor, I was on the reactor instrumentation construction crew, and out of that entire crew, there were maybe, the crew of probably 10 to 12 people. I understood it, my foreman understood it, my lead man understood it, and there were maybe one more that understood it somewhat. None of them really had the physics knowledge to understand it completely. Where I had a little bit of electrical background and pneumatics and mechanical background. So you also had an interface between crafts, electricians, and instrumentation personnel. Then you had pipe fitters. You had welders, and they all had their own procedures to go by. So it was quite interesting to see. As an instrumentation fitter, I never had to study the welding procedures, but I did always ask questions to the welders to make sure that I knew what his procedure said. Now, those procedures were available if I wanted to go and ask a welding foreman to see them, but a lot of times I would just find it out on my own and go ahead and read that procedure, or at least look at the parts of the procedure that were pertaining to me and the welder as to what I needed to do.
It's really fascinating how compartmentalized it is. I would think that they would want it more holistic so that there wouldn't be any mess ups. So, I mean, this is such a grave thing. These are not like small errors, No,
they're not, especially when you look at it from a design engineering point. But I was told that I could not ask design engineering questions. Well, I could ask some questions, but I could not write a non-conforming item report on design engineering. When I saw basically physically, I actually saw that the design was faulty on certain items. I was told that I could not NCI design, which was write a non-conforming item report. I could not write an R2A report, which is a minor discrepancy report. I couldn't do anything like that to question design or make them answer, because if I had done that, then that would take away the so-called credibility from the design department.
What was the name of the power plant in question? Or what is the name?
The one that I worked on the longest was the Catawba Nuclear Station, Rock Hill, South Carolina.
Catawba. Yeah, I'm on Duke Energy's website. Looks like it's right off of a lot of ocean inlets right there, huh? Or rivers on either side?
No, it's not ocean. That's Lake Wiley. It's on the Catawba River. Just up the river from it is McGuire, the sister station. That's on the other side of Charlotte. Both of those are on the Catawba River. also feeding into Lake Norman on the Catawba River, which is the next lake up. Well, there's Mountain Island Lake between the two. Between Lake Wiley and Lake Norman, there's Mountain Island Lake, which used to have the River Bend steam station, which was coal-fired. And there's also a coal-fired plant on Lake Norman called Marshall Steam Station.
Yeah, if you go to Duke Energy's website and look up their power plants, they got a map that shows they've got so many power plants in that area, it's not even funny. And there's 6 nuclear stations in that area owned by Duke Energy.
Wow.
We got Brunswick, Robinson, Harris, McGuire, Catawba, and Oconee. Yeah, McGuire.
And McGuire. And the Brunswick and one or two of the other ones, Duke Power didn't build those. So I don't know what construction specs they were built under.
Right. Well, one thing I can say, at least for that type of, for the Westinghouse versus the General Electric reactor, is at least the control rods on the Westinghouse are on top of the reactor instead of on the bottom of the vessel. Because that was one of the big problems with Fukushima and the General Electric boiling water reactor was that the control rods melted and all the corium just flowed right through the holes that the control rods left. Whereas this reactor at least has a solid bottom, Yeah,
and the bottom is a little thick. I mean, the bottom, the dome-shaped part at the bottom, it is the thickest part of the reactor vessel. But
yeah, it better be.
Something that gets to the point that it can actually, to a heat point that it can actually evaporate steel. I mean, just way like it wasn't there. Well, anything that changes atomic structure can change the atomic structure of the steel also.
Well, yeah, neutrons, the Wigner effect is a big thing.
Yeah, and
you know,
they were constant studies on what materials that we could or could not use in the reactor building, and we would use them for a year or two, and then they'd come back out and say, well, we can't use this anymore. Well, what about the ones that we've already got installed with this? Well, we're just going to have to live with that. We're not going to address that.
Hope for the best, right?
Yeah.
I think that's what it is. It's like it's inevitable this thing's going to blow up. Let's just hope for the best and do the best we can in the meantime. And it probably won't affect us. It most likely won't affect us, right? I think that's the mindset.
I'm actually a little taken aback by what you said, Walter, about how they take advantage of the economy and because of the big money involved, right? Like they buy a lot of people's complicity because people need a job. People want to work. I mean, this is the thing that I really am dumbfounded by. Even if it costs them, say, I don't know, an extra $10 million to do it properly at every power plant, if they did the power plants correctly, like really tuned in and worked hard to make that energy really work and make them super compliant, even after all of that, we still are producing nuclear waste to which they still are not addressing. There's two issues with this. One is that there's the nuclear waste that they're not even making an attempt to figure out how to remediate it and make it turn back into what it was. And number two is the denial, and that's what you're suffering.
Oh my God!
The complete
I'm
denial.
So sorry. Hey, you know what?
Denial. Excuse me. Hello, Jerome.
I'm so sorry, Lonnie. Yes, I just found. I was looking up that power plant on the NRC's website, and guess what I just came across just this year?
What?
The plug valve, and Mr. Truth, you'll understand this. The plug valve designs provided for XO, MOX, model, figure numbers, etc. These valves have been identified as used in nuclear and or safety-related applications. The stem for the subject valve models was identified as being undersized based on allowable yield stress analysis of the stem while in torsion and high-stress conditions, was due to high torque required to seat or unseat the plug when installed with ultra-high molecular weight polyurethane sleeve material. High friction factor inherent in this material causes torsional stress to exceed the upper limit of yield strength of the valve, which could result in fatigue and yielding, i.e. breaking, of the stem, thus preventing the valve from opening and closing while in service. Historical research performed thus far has not identified any problems with the valve so far. And it says that the corrective action, which has been, is to lube it up. I mean...
Yeah.
What did you say, Mr. Truth?
He there in what he just read.
Yes, sir.
Has not been identified.
So it's identified, but they're saying we don't see any problems, so we don't need to fix it.
But who
and at the very top it says it's been redacted.
Huh.
Redacted.
Yeah.
So it's been. Well, it's been made. They've made them aware of it, but they've also gave them a satisfactory answer, and that's Duke Power giving them the answer.
Right. It's about the denial. Are you completely angry because you're having medical issues post-working here that you think are related to this exposure to these chemicals and the contamination out there? I mean...
Well,
go ahead.
Not only do I believe related to this, but I believe it's also related to the Fukushima.
Amen to that, brother. You were right.
Yes.
When you look at the currents of the Pacific Ocean and where Fukushima is located, and you still got all this radiation over there that's just spewing out and getting into the groundwater. And
amen to that.
Right. The current goes toward the north and comes around by Alaska and right down our west coast. And then you've got that small strip of land right there on the Mexican peninsula and everything that it drifts right. You know, the weather, all of our weather in this region comes up out of the Gulf of Mexico, most of it. So,
Exactly. And they just found out Woods Hole Institute, Woods Hole, who actually in 2014 was telling everybody the fish is fine, don't worry about it. Now their studies are showing that indeed the Fukushima radiation is on the West Coast, up and down the entire West Coast from Canada all the way down to Mexico. They have found it. So you are right about that.
And it's getting worse and worse every year.
First, if it's reported, the NRC just raises the limits. You know?
Right, exactly. In fact, they have raised the limits. That's what they did right after Fukushima, was they raised the limits a lot. They used to warn us when 1 in 10,000 persons would get cancer from their exposure to nuclear contamination. Now the limit, I get the number mixed up. It's either 1 in 26 or 1 in 23. I tend to think it's 1 in 26. So when 1 in 26 people get cancer, they'll say, hey, we're being really badly exposed to radioactivity. You know what that means? That means everybody's going to have cancer at that point.
Yeah, because 1 in 26, I mean, from 1 in 10,000, you know, who can say what causes the cancer?
They do know. This is the thing. They do know what causes it. John Goffman and Arthur Tamplin did extensive studies, and Dr. Linus Pauling Yes, the same one from the vitamin C guy. They were studying nuclear radioactivity and its effects on human health definitively in the late 40s, the 50s, the 60s. By the 60s, it was hands down. In fact, they know that for every 2 rads in the air of radioactive contamination for a population of 1 million people, you are going to have 32,000 extra cancers a year and over 200,000 birth defects a year. They know that.
Yes, ma'am. And they know, but there again,
it's
average
calculated cost, you know.
We are assets on a balance sheet.
Yeah, the average person that has average income for today does not care about that as long as he walks over there and turns on the light switch and the lights come on.
That's a really good way to put it. As long as they can go over there. This is why you say that it was the big scare. That's why they went, like, they just started, like, not telling us. I mean, the safety became less important after the big energy crunch, I imagine. That's kind of the message I heard you say earlier, is after that big scare in the 70s or 80s, whenever that was, when the Saudi Arabians and all the Arabs decided, hey, we're going to withhold the oil and then we'll see how much you like us. That's when they said, hey, let's just do this and let's don't worry about the details. We can fix it as we go along.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, you had a double-edged sword there where the oil was being cut, gasoline prices went from 15 to 25 cents a gallon up to 75 to 80 cents a gallon to $1 a gallon, you know, and at the same time the Environmental Protection Agency was on them about coal emissions and things of that nature, which was good. But why did they not, instead of spending the money on nuclear power stations, concentrate more on solar energy, wind energy, geothermal, renewable energy sources? It would have been much less harmful to our environment, and it would have also been, well, just probably more economical to the power companies. But power companies are out there to make money.
That's true.
What they do. Money.
So you know what? Just today, I was looking at the NRC's event notification report for March 27th, and just today, at the Pilgrim plant in Massachusetts, we have control rod piping that is potentially inoperable. We have in Watts Bar, Tennessee,
Pilgrim's has been closed down.
Temporary loss of control
Jerome.
room.
The Pilgrim has been closed down for about 2.5, 3 weeks now.
Right, but this
was
is
the
another
first
problem.
I think that is a very big notification, because did it just
Farley,
post up
Alabama.
today? Wow.
No, this is just when it posted up.
What's the date on the event? What does it say the date of the event is, if you don't mind me asking?
The day of the event is 3/26.
Wow, so they just reported it yesterday.
3/26.
Wow. Okay.
See,
and then there's like 12 or 14 critical, in my opinion, control room, control rod issues in these plants. Control rods are pretty darn important, are they not, Mr. Truth?
Yes, sir. Without the control rod, you cannot control the amount of fission process that's taking place in the reactor vessel itself, because
that puppy's going to blow up.
Yeah, as they're extracted, the fission process speeds up. As they're lowered,
neutrons flow.
they lower the control rods into it to slow it down.
Yeah, that's just not good.
So the reactor rods slow down the fission process. That's the specific things they do. They
absorb neutrons.
They absorb the neutrons.
Is what they do.
Exactly.
Yes.
The further down they go into the reactor vessel, more neutrons they absorb.
Okay, so this is me. I mean, I don't mean to be dense here, guys, but this is just beyond comprehension for me, that the reason that that guy put his finger to his mouth and pursed his lips and indicated to you to be quiet, and the NRC agent looked away while he told you to shut up, is without regard to human health or any problem that it would cause further down the line. They're like, yeah, go ahead, because we've got 2 of these designs and we don't want to have to do both of them, and it's going to be a lot of money, so let's don't talk about it. That money, you're telling me that money is the reason that they put millions of people's lives in danger to save a few $1 million?
Yes, the best I can tell, that's what happened, because it's like I said, the NRC is strictly just a paperwork monitoring, making sure everything's documented. If there's any testing to go on, the company decides how to test it. They write their own procedures.
You know what? Now I know why there's secrecy, because if people knew, they'd be as flaming mad as I am right now. When you get really right down to it, these nuclear plants are the greatest insult to humanity ever suggested. Because not only are they hard to deal with, and we have a byproduct that we have no idea how to remediate and how to ameliorate its negative effects, but we also have these nuclear facilities that are being built knowingly incorrect and weak. And we have an NRC who keeps the industry hobbling along. Check, check, check. Can you imagine if the millions of Americans really put a grasp around this information? If the youth who are now angry about guns understood about this?
Yeah, well, I would hope that they would get mad about it.
I would hope that they would be demonstrating on, not just the youth, but the whole entire population of the United States that cares about
you bet
our future and our globe and our economy and our well, not our economy, but so much as our environment.
But you know what happens, Mr. Truth, is it's difficult to get people out because so many adults are enganche. They're like already in. They have the hook around their neck. You know what I mean? They're already in the system. Like you said, when you were working there, you felt guilty.
Well, I eventually asked for a transfer away from the nuclear stations, and I was told that there was no place for me to go, so they would just have to terminate me.
Wow. Is that how you ended up working? Is that what made you stop working there?
Yeah, I left. I mean, I went, this is the way Duke Power works, or Duke Energy works. I was only one person. So they sent me for evaluations and things like that, and they said, well, we're going to give you like 4 weeks here, after I turned in my request for transfer. They said, well, we're going to give you 4 weeks to try to get your head together here, and we're going to place you on what we call a little leave period, and then, come to find out they were calling me, it was actually a time for me to decide and them to decide whether they wanted to just fire one individual or terminate one individual, or that if I, or I could come back in and keep my mouth shut and do my job and, do what they wanted me to do instead of telling the truth. I'm sorry, Lonnie, but I cannot live with myself. I got to look at myself in the mirror.
Right.
I've got children. I've got grandchildren.
Right.
And I did not want to harm the environment that they were going to have to live in.
Yeah. It really honestly is not worth the electricity. It's not worth flipping on your light switch this is the thing actually, is that the nuclear facilities actually cost us money, a lot of money, because as they break down, they're much more expensive to run. The more they, jimmy rig it and make it work and not do it right and not really invest the money, it actually gets the plant very expensive. The Columbia Generating Station here in Washington, upstream from us, of which I pay a portion of the bill. My bill is higher because it's losing $500 million a year.
Exactly.
And it's always going into scram. I mean, it is why they are keeping it open. We have no idea, but they are definitely refusing to shut it down. Bob Alvarez did a 30-page scientific review, financial scientific review of the whole thing, and showed because they are mandated to be a profitable, by their charter, they're mandated to be a profitable nuclear power plant. He thought that would shut it down, and they are just ignoring his report.
Yeah. Well, power companies do find ways on their tax returns to use things as a write-off. For example, all the tools that we use during construction, at the end of the job, instead of transferring those tools to other departments, because these were only tools that were used during construction, not actually exposed to any radiation. At the end of the job, they went out and dug a great big hole. And they took all of those tools when they transferred from construction to nuclear production. The plant was actually turned over for operation. They went out and took those tools and dug a great big hole and buried electric drills. We're talking about some tools that would actually have cost $1,000 or more to.
You know what that says? They think they're radioactive.
No, they didn't think they were radioactive. The reason was because they could then use that as a tax write-off.
They weren't radioactive, so they just buried them because they could say that they didn't have them any longer. That's illegal to do that. You can't destroy your tools so you can write them off, can you?
Well, evidently they can.
That'd be a good case for the IRS, actually.
Nuclear production, the ones that actually operate the plant, went out and purchased all new tools instead of using the older tools that was used on construction and transferring them over to nuclear production or station maintenance support for coal-fired plants or anything of that nature. They just went out and dug a big hole. There goes $2-3 million worth of tools just dumped into the hole, covered up.
That's completely outrageous. And that's I bet you that's common for them. That probably was part of their procedure, wasn't it?
Well, I think they were just working with financial people, and they were like, okay, we need so many tax write-offs, so what can we do? And I said, well, and the only thing we can do here is, when you get a professional accountant and a professional tax agent, and you know.
But that is actually, I mean, that's what I am, Mr. Truth. That's what I do for a living. That's actually illegal. A real professional, I mean, a shyster professional maybe, one that ought to be examined by the IRS. I'm thinking, frankly, that maybe they thought that those tools were contaminated. Because you can't just say, oh, we're going to destroy tools so we can go buy more. That's not an allowable expense write-off. You can't, like, destroy your car so you can buy another one and write it off as a complete loss. But they're doing it, huh?
Person can't. But when...
Yeah, I think they've got their own thing.
Yeah, they've got their own... I mean, if they can let the quality assurance guy sit there and tell me to hush when I'm trying to tell the truth, and
yeah, I get you. If they're willing to do that type of thing, they are willing to do anything. I get you completely. Like that thing with burying their tools is nothing compared to the crimes they're doing by not allowing you to, make corrections to the design to improve it.
Well, because all new tools were purchased for the nuclear production crews. So, therefore, that was added on to an operating expense.
Say that again. All the tools were what?
All new
So
tools.
they threw away the old ones.
When nuclear production took over, they had all new tools. Because those were tools that were subject to being placed in radioactive areas and things like that. And if they are, then they are used maybe once, and when you take it out, if it shows signs of radiation contamination on that tool, then it's destroyed and another one's bought. And by destroyed, I mean it's thrown into a barrel as low-level radioactive waste contamination, taken out into the desert in a sealed barrel and put below wherever they're putting all the rest of the supposedly low-level contaminated products at. But by them destroying the old tools that were on construction, that was the write-off.
Well, they're writing them off as contaminated. I can guarantee you they're writing them off as contaminated.
Well,
I mean, they may not be accurately contaminated, so they're just writing off everything and buying new tools. I mean, the whole industry is just, honestly, the whole thing is set up on lies, and disregard for human life. You know what, Mr. Truth? We have about 40 seconds left. I want to thank you for joining us, man. This has been a really informational interview, and I really appreciate it. And thank you, Jerome, for joining us. You've really added to the conversation. I knew you would. So thank you, Mr. Truth. I hope that you'll come back in a month or so.
I will definitely try, Lonnie.
Okay, you guys. Well, look, I apologize. My phone's on the other room.
From United. Call from United.
It happens to be the IRS calling me, so put your courage feet on. My office hours are 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., so that's why they're calling right now. Put your courage feet on, you guys. We'll talk with you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lonnie.
Uh-huh.
Thank you, Jerome.
Thanks, sir.